Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters, with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk, a judge is considering the arguments over whether convenience stores should be allowed to sell cold beer.
Our gas station friends would very much like to sell it like peanut butter.
Will Indiana's broad alcohol restrictions keep it from being used? Or do they limit competition, forcing you to pay more for a frosty brew? Social Security numbers, addresses, and names of 146,000 Indiana University students and recent grads potentially exposed.
We feel there isn't a criminal intent out there with this. It was more of just these crawlers hitting it.
We talked to a cybersecurity expert to explain what went wrong and what people who were impacted need to know. Plus, in our History Through Headlines segment, we go back to World War II, when 6 teams attended spring training here in Indiana. Those stories and a look at this week's headlines right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Hello, welcome to this week's Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Indiana University revealed Tuesday that records for 146,000 students and recent graduates had been compromised. Students from across the state from all 7 IU campuses were affected. Josh and Lynn reports on the nature of the breach and some of the challenges in keeping data secure.
The names, addresses, and social security numbers of 146,000 IU students and graduates were left in a publicly accessible, non-password protected online folder since early 2013. On Tuesday, IU officials reported the breach to the state attorney general's office.
I'm actually very shocked that the information has been out there this long. I think that's way too long.
I do trust IU to kind of be careful with with my information, but yeah, all my internet access is over IU's network.
As they say, the biggest breach of security anywhere is not really the computers themselves, it's the human beings.
Naturally, with the incident comes comparisons. Target's high-profile data breach in December affected millions of customers and had a significant impact on the retail giant's business. Target confirmed profits fell 40% after the announcement. Fortunately for IU, there are more differences than similarities to the Target breach. Here's a big one. Hackers intentionally set out to obtain information from Target's servers. At IU, Associate Vice President for Public Safety Mark Bruin says no humans saw the student files. Instead, automated programs called web crawlers accessed the data.
Well, as these automated programs go from sort of server to server, computer to computer, network to network, they're looking for things that, I guess, based on some criteria that the company has set, would be interesting to people who do the searches. And so it's looking across for files, it's looking for web pages, it's looking for all manner of things, and it does that on every internet address that it finds.
IU staff found web crawlers for 3 companies: Google, Baidu, the Chinese equivalent to Google, and a third company that had already gone out of business.
At some point, these files had, the folder that these files were in, or the files had passwords on them. And so when a web crawler hits those, it tries to access the files, it, is asked for a password, and certainly the web crawler doesn't know what the password is, and so it drops it and goes on. In this case, the password at some point had been dropped. And so the web crawlers had access to it. The web crawlers were not asked for the password at that point, and so then they were able to access the files and cache those.
IU officials are blaming simple human error for the security breach, not a software or hardware glitch. Software security consultant Karthik Ganesh says data breaches are fairly common. There was one just last week at the University of Maryland that affected more than 300,000 faculty, staff, and students.
The organization do their best to identify these vulnerabilities earlier and try to mitigate them. But even more sophisticated softwares gets affected. So the practice is to kind of stay up to date and keep looking for security vulnerabilities and try to fix them as soon as possible.
Ganesh says this incident could have been avoided if IU had conducted security testing periodically.
Data needs to be handled securely, and especially if it's a social security number and other sensitive details. Those details have to be stored securely, and there should be proper authentication and authorization controls in place. And those pages shouldn't be allowed to cache on the browsers.
IU staff have since moved the records to a secure location where it can't be accessed without credentials. They've also submitted requests to Google and Baidu to remove the information from their databases.
We're definitely doing a thorough investigation on what we can do different in the future, and looking at different options just to really make sure that we don't have any other issues with this student information.
In the meantime, Indiana University has set up a call center and a frequently asked questions page for students concerned about their records.
I know IU will handle it. I do trust that, but I do think it is a serious concern, and I think it's going to have to be dealt with a lot of resources.
The director of the IU Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, Fred Kate, is here to give us some more insights into this story. First, though, we want to mention that the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research is a sponsor of this program. Fred, we heard there, Kennedy, at the end of that piece say that the university is looking for what they can do to try to not keep this from happening again. What are some of the general guidelines of a university as big as IU to keep data safe, and who enforces that?
Right, so it's a big challenge because remember, a university is not only big, but it's also very diverse. And so every department, every school operates data. What we try to do is ensure that data that would be sensitive, that would include student data, anything with student grades or social security numbers, things like that are kept not only in password protected files, but are also kept behind firewalls. So they're not even really visible from the internet unless you come in with very specific authentication credentials. We've been incredibly successful at that. IU is one of the leaders in doing that. And so you have to have the protections, you have to train your personnel in how to use them, you have to have oversight so that you catch things when they do go wrong, inevitably sometimes they will, and so that you mitigate any damage if damage occurs.
Is part of this staying ahead of the hackers?
It's very important to stay ahead, but remember, this wasn't a hack. So this is an example of just a human error leaves data exposed. In many ways, you could say it was a fairly fortunate incident, and that there was no human access to the data. Guarding against hackers is much harder because hackers are actually going to try to exploit any vulnerability they can find, take advantage of any weakness, and very often that is a human weakness, get someone to provide their password.
Now, I assume there's a cost that is associated with this too.
There is a cost. First of all, cybersecurity is not cheap because it's a 24/7, 365-day undertaking. So there's a real cost in that, and there's also a cost in the training and the monitoring and the oversight and so forth. The other thing is cybersecurity can also impede your access to data that you really need to do your job. And so the challenge is how to not let it get so much in the way that you actually can't do your job. On the other hand, you don't want the data to be insecure.
We keep talking about the big corporations, but what about small businesses? Are they able to keep up with cybersecurity?
I think the answer is no, and the good news is that a lot of the attacks are against large players. So large players invest more, they're more obvious attacks, they have more data. But if you think about, for example, 15 million app developers around the world, typically these are 2 or 3 person operations, even though they may be getting very sensitive information from your iPhone or from your Android. These are the types of places we actually really worry about cybersecurity.
We have this email that was sent to students this morning regarding this big IU breach. Was wondering, some of the students not too happy. What's your take on how the university handled this situation?
I actually think the university response has been quite credible. In other words, first of all, it's not an attack, it's not a breach. No data was handed over to a human, no data was exfiltrated by somebody coming in to steal data. Rather, it was an accidental and unfortunate and wrong exposure of data. To our knowledge, there was no human access to the data. I think the university has jumped on it very quickly and has tried to respond very aggressively. But to be honest, the real test is going to be not just the response to this incident, but the steps taken to make sure that these types of incidents are not repeated in the future, that students have confidence that their data is protected.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that insight. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And now for headlines, we go over to Alex Dirkman, who has an update on this week's top stories. Alex.
Thank you, Joe. Anytime you make a phone call, you should dial the area code first. That's the message from state officials who want people to take some time and adjust to the change before 10-digit dialing becomes mandatory in early September. The state is introducing the new 930 area code in the fall because all of the 812 numbers will be exhausted by 2015. Governor Mike Pence is continuing his push for a pre-K pilot program despite the fact that lawmakers have gutted the original legislation. Pence's proposal would have created a program to provide vouchers for 1,000 low-income children to attend preschool. Instead, lawmakers passed a stripped-down version of the bill that sends the pre-K proposal to a study committee that will be tasked with determining the best way to administer preschool education before committing any state dollars to a pilot program. The Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles is facing more allegations that it overcharged Hoosiers for services. A group filed a class action lawsuit in October, and this week a judge denied the state's request to have it thrown out. As you might remember, the BMV settled a similar legal battle in August by agreeing to refund $30 million for overcharges on driver's licenses. It's currently a felony, but if a bill that's making its way through the legislature is approved, you'll be allowed to bring a gun onto school property. It would have to be locked inside a car in a parking lot, though. The bill's sponsor says the legislation is meant to protect parents who have their guns with them when they pick their kids up after school. Opponents say the bill is dangerous and that the answer to combating gun violence is not to have more guns near schools. A bill regulating doctors who perform abortions no longer makes the doctor's information public. The bill, as it was originally written, would have required backup physicians to have proof of their doctor's admitting privileges on record with the State Department of Health. Some said that would have potentially exposed the doctors to harassment. There's mutual support for the amended bill, with pro-life groups noting that it still takes certain abortion clinics have written agreements with local doctors, which they say will help ensure patient safety. The Indiana House voted unanimously this week in favor of legislation that includes a proposal for a study that would raise awareness about the large number of sexual assaults in the state. Statistics indicate that nearly 1 in 5 high school-aged girls is raped before she graduates. The study will look at the causes of sexual assault, including who the perpetrators are, where the assaults are happening, and why they're underreported. Lawmakers say they'll use the results of the study to develop stronger prevention policies. American Civil Liberties Union officials say they're pleased with the changes the Indiana Department of Corrections has made over the past year to improve its facilities and services for mentally ill inmates. A ruling last year said the Department of Corrections was failing to provide its mentally ill prisoners with adequate treatment, putting them in isolation and depriving them of needed medical attention. Since then, the Department of Corrections has created a new mental health unit at the Pendleton Correctional Facility in central Indiana and is training its staff to better handle inmates with mental illnesses. If global warming creates drier conditions, as scientists have predicted, the state's forests could suffer. That's according to research from IU published this week. The report indicates many of the trees in the Morgan-Monroe State Forest are growing less in years with less rainfall. The researchers say that also means the trees are taking up less carbon dioxide, and that could speed up climate change. IU researchers recommend the state take more active approaches to regenerating oak trees in Indiana's forests because oaks are more resistant to drought. Rather than extend the school year to make up for snow days, one district is tacking on e-learning days. As Claire McInerney reports, it's a way to cover a lot of material before I-STEP testing begins next month.
Eastern Howard School Corporation near Kokomo had 15 two-hour delays and 9 school cancellations so far this winter.
I've been a superintendent for 13 years, and it was by far the worst winter that I've ever experienced.
Cadell says extending school into the summer wasn't an option for I-STEP preparations and families with vacations already scheduled. So the district is adding e-learning days on Saturdays, 2 in March and 2 in May.
Eastern is a K-12 one-to-one iPad school corporation, so every student has an iPad. Instruction will be delivered to the students on those Saturdays with their teachers.
The district is also holding class on 2 holidays and is staying an additional hour every Wednesday.
And that means students will still get out for the year before the beginning of June, and graduation won't have to be pushed back. An index that aims to predict the state's future economic climate saw a significant decline this month, and economists blame the weather. The Indiana Business Research Center's leading index showed declines in all of its components, including small business optimism and confidence in the housing market. Economists say Hoosiers weren't going out to look at model homes in the chill and in the snow. Builders are beginning to worry whether they'll have to work this spring. Researchers say the cold temperatures also caused a drop in vehicle sales. And a measure that would allow you to buy alcohol at the state fair now awaits the governor's signature. The bill's author expects it to become law. And Joe, officials have said they envision a separate section at the fair where visitors will be able to enjoy Indiana craft beers and wine.
Along with something deep fried, of course.
Of course.
Thanks, Alex. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Will the latest effort to loosen Indiana's alcohol regulations go anywhere? Ahead, we speak to a legal expert who explains the arguments in the case and how the judge is likely to rule. We take a look back in our History Through Headlines segment to baseball spring training in Indiana, why 6 major league teams trained throughout the state in 1943. And winter is not over yet. More on this weekend's weather outlook right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Frontline provides me with information that makes me think.
First I shout at the television.
You gotta be kidding!
You won't see this anywhere else.
The stories hit close to home.
Truth is a very valuable commodity.
They're uncompromising.
I want to do something. I want to take action.
It changed the way I actually live my life. It lets me make up my mind.
I trust it. When I watch Frontline,
it makes me angry and it makes me want to voice it.
I want to make a difference.
We can make a difference.
Frontline.
These guys are my heroes.
What if television could sweep us away to another time and place?
Very nice, my lady.
And could take us from the Gilded Age to the Great War. From the heat of the chase to the heart of a queen. No one tells stories like PBS. Give to your PBS station and help bring stories like these to life.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Alcohol laws across the country are a hodgepodge of regulations, many of which date back to the 1930s. The 21st Amendment ended prohibition and left states with nearly exclusive power to decide how to regulate alcohol within their geographic boundaries. In Indiana, nearly all carry-out sales of alcohol are prohibited on Sundays, and the liquor stores hold the exclusive right to sell cold beer. As Sarah Whitmire reports, the battle to loosen some of those regulations is playing out in court after a group of convenience stores filed suit against the state for the right to sell cold beer.
Tassie Gennady has lived in Bloomington, Indiana for 2.5 years. She's lived all over the U.S., New Mexico, Vermont, and California. She was surprised to learn when she moved here she couldn't go to the grocery or stop in a gas station and pick up a cold beer.
I walked into the grocery store, and the fact that there was alcohol in the grocery store, I was like, okay. But then I was like, okay, where's the refrigerated section? And it just wasn't there. And I think that I went to a Kroger that had like the chiller for the wine. And I was like, okay, so I could chill a bottle of wine, but I'm not allowed to, like, what if I put a bottle of beer each? And yeah, so it was very strange.
It was another Hoosier who ignited the current battle. A man from Richmond, Indiana, bought a chilled 12-pack of Bud Light from a liquor store for $13.36. He bought the same warm 12-pack from a Richmond convenience store for almost $3 less. He then crossed over the border into Ohio and bought the same 12-pack cold for $11.76.
You know, one of the things Indiana consumers will realize when they go buy cold beer in a liquor store, the very first thing the clerk does is touch the package, because if the package cold, you get charged a higher price than if you would have picked up a case of beer that was just on their floor.
According to IMUS, Indiana is the only state in the country that regulates beer sales based on temperature.
No state has the public policy goal of making alcohol readily available. There is consequences for when a controlled product is misused or missold.
Tam says the state has the constitutional right under the 21st Amendment to determine how alcohol is sold and who sells it.
Other states have done various other matters as well. However, we believe that the state of Indiana has created a system that's worked well for its public.
Tam says the legislature, not the courtroom, is the place to set public policy. For years, the Convenience Store Association tried that avenue, but none of the proposals ever gained any traction in the legislature. They say it's because the liquor lobbyists like Tam have such a strong hold over the legislature. The group's suit contends the restrictions that prohibit gas stations, grocery stores, and pharmacies from selling cold beer are discriminatory and grant unequal protection to one group, the liquor store industry. Indiana University law professor David Orntlicker says it's going to be difficult for the plaintiffs to use the equal protection argument in court.
What the court has said is it's okay to draw distinctions and treat some people differently than others. It's okay to treat grocery stores different than convenience stores and different from gas stations and liquor stores. You can treat them differently as long as it's not irrational.
What you tend to hear more about are individual cases that might be based on race or sex or religion, but the courts have long recognized and held, the Supreme Court has long held, that businesses also are protected by the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution.
John Maley, the lead attorney on the case, has also represented this station in an unrelated matter. He says the recent ruling in Evansville's smoking ban case adds strength to his case.
They said restaurants and bars can't smoke there, but can smoke in the casino. And the Indiana Supreme Court said, no, that violates equal privileges. So businesses were entitled to be treated equally.
Liquor stores are heavily regulated. There are rules about who can enter, where stores can be located, and employees have to have special permits to sell alcohol. That's why Patrick Tam says they should continue to have the exclusive right to sell cold beer.
We believe alcohol is very much different than peanut butter. Our gas station friends would very much like to sell it like peanut butter, and we believe that alcohol is sold in a regulated environment because there are consequences when you misuse or inappropriately sell alcohol.
Sarah Whitmire joins us now for more on the story. Sarah, it was said the plaintiffs keep saying that actually the liquor stores are worse at selling liquor to underage people, right?
Despite all the regulations. It's really interesting. The excise police has a program where they go around to all places that sell alcohol, and they test to see if these permit holders are selling to minors. The program's been in existence for 4 years, and in each of those 4 years, it's actually the liquor stores, not convenience stores or gas stations or drug stores, that have sold to minors most often.
So the line on what convenience stores and gas stations can sell is whether or not the alcohol contains hops. Is that right? So we spoke to Quinn Rickers. He owns 50 convenience stores in Indiana, and here's what he said.
You can go into one of our stores and buy a bottle of wine cold at 14% alcohol. But what doesn't make any sense is you can go into one of our stores, buy that bottle of alcohol cold at 14%. You can't buy a 4% bottle of beer at our stores cold. So it just really doesn't make sense for us in our minds that this differentiation.
I think what that really shows is that the laws are confusing, but it's important to add some context because they're confusing in every state. Yes, Indiana has some quirky laws, but just in doing my research, you know, New York almost prohibits chain liquor stores because the owner has to live within a certain radius of their business, and it's Pennsylvania and Idaho both require that you buy alcohol from state-run stores. So the laws are all over the map.
Very interesting. Thanks so much, Sarah,
for
that report. And now we take a look back at what was making the news in our History Through Headlines segment. In 1943, the film Casablanca was released. Emerging singer Frank Sinatra made his debut on radio's Your Hit Parade. FDR was president, and 6 Major League Baseball teams in Indiana. The headline reads, "Welcome to Bloomington, Cincinnati Reds." In the midst of World War II, Major League Baseball spring training was held in the northern states due to wartime travel restrictions. 6 teams were sent to Indiana. The Chicago Cubs and White Sox trained in French Lick. The Cleveland Indians trained in Lafayette. The Detroit Tigers were in Evansville, the Pittsburgh Pirates in Muncie, and the Cincinnati Reds settled in Bloomington at IU's Jordan Field, where the Indiana Memorial Union parking lot exists today.
Everything I've read about, it was astounding because the Reds were supposed to be a pennant winner. They had a lot of popular players, so you can imagine if the Reds today or the Yankees or whomever would come here and work out at Bloomington and be here for those weeks. It was quite a buzz. It was a big deal.
The poor weather forced the Reds and their exhibition opponent, the Indianapolis Indians, to train inside the Wildermuth Gymnasium.
So the Reds show up for spring training in 1943. Their groundskeepers and all came a little bit early. They were a little bit shocked at what they had, but this is where they worked from.
The IDS reported on that first exhibition game on Jordan Field. The Reds defeated the Indians 8-6 in front of a capacity crowd of 2,000 fans. The team stayed at the Graham Hotel in downtown Bloomington and walked to the 10th Street Stadium, where the Arboretum is now for locker room facilities, then before heading to the field house for practice. The Reds would return for spring training in Bloomington the following year, despite all the rain and snow that canceled some games. Beginning Saturday night, a winter storm watch takes effect. Depending where you are, the storm system is predicted to include freezing rain, sleet, and snow across the area through Monday morning. Now, all this information is still developing, but forecasters say to expect a significant amount of precipitation.
Joe, what does that mean? Are we expecting like an inch of snow? Or are we back to like 12 inches?
I think right now what they're saying is 6+ Indianapolis area, 2 to 6 further south where we are. But again, it's still too early to say. And of course, we'll have all the information on our website.
We will. Just be careful.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news in southern Indiana throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Indiana University's Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, presenting Security Matters, with tips for improving online security in 3 minutes or less. And by WTIU members. Thank you.